Hello, Year 4. What a pleasure to be seeing you virtually again. We are looking today at RE again with Mr. Smith, and we are continuing to think about the Muslim community in the UK. And last week I told you a Muslim was a follower of a certain religion, and that religion is, yes, hopefully yes, Islam. Okay, so we're looking at the Muslim community in Britain. Last week we looked at where they lived. Hopefully you could name some of the towns and cities that I said had a lot of Muslims or a large Muslim community. Rochdale, Birmingham, Luton, London, Bristol, Leicester, any of those. Um, and today we're going to look at the roots of that community, and we'll talk about what we mean by roots. Okay, so time for some statistics, some interesting facts about British Muslim communities. So let's have a look. In the 2011 census, which is where the government goes out and it goes to every household and it says who lives here and what race are they and what religion are they and what do they do for a job and how old are they, the government found out that there were 2,706,066 Muslim people living in England and Wales. So actually, my fault, but this map is wrong on the right. We're just talking about England and Wales. We're not talking about Scotland. So just this part here. That is about 5% of the UK's population. So if the UK had 100 people in it, hopefully you'll be able to quickly work out how many of those would be Muslim. Should have said 5. So 5 out of every 100 people in the UK are from a Muslim background. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that they pray every day. It doesn't necessarily mean that they practice Islam, but it means that they identify themselves on a form when it comes through the door and says, I am a Muslim. Okay. About half of those 2.7 million people were born in the UK. So Islam hasn't always been a very big religion in the UK. Islam has been here for, well, centuries. There have been Muslims coming to visit from different parts of the world, but it's only in the last 60 or 70 years that Islam has become quite an important part of British culture and an important part of what it means to live in Britain. It used to be that most Muslims who lived in the UK a couple of decades ago, so maybe 40 or 50 years ago, had moved to the UK from a different country. But we've seen a change now that nearly half of these people, half of the Muslim people who live in Britain now, were actually born here in the UK. They would identify themselves maybe as British Muslims. So that's, as I say, what I've just said. So there haven't always been so many Muslim people living in Britain. But many of them have moved here in the last 70 years. And people continue to move. It's called immigration, people moving into the country, emigration, people leaving the country. And that's been going on now for decades and decades and decades. Okay, so if we look at where these families moved to the UK from, so not necessarily where the person involved comes from, because likely that there's a good chance they were born in the UK, but instead we're going to look at where their family came from a couple of generations ago. This chart helps us answer the question, what are the roots of these communities? So which country did they originate or begin in? Okay, take a look at the chart in front of you, and I want you to tell me the three biggest Muslim communities in the UK, or the roots of the three biggest Muslim communities in the UK. And of course, when you've done that, you're going to write it in your booklet on the page where you've got a copy of this chart. You're going to tell me the roots of the three largest Muslim communities. And those are, of course, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India. We can look at some of these other smaller communities. 4% of Muslims in the UK have converted to Islam, so they weren't born Muslim. I think that's quite interesting. Somalia, Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, and you might know Muslim people whose families come from other areas as well, 2%. But over half of the Muslim community in the UK comes from Pakistan. 20%, so 20 out of every 100 Muslims comes from Bangladesh, and 11%, 11 out of every 100 Muslims come from India, or their family, their roots are in India. So, what does that actually mean? Let's look. The roots, yep. This is a really interesting fact. It is not the same in other countries in Europe. It is not the same in France. It's not the same in Germany. To say that over half of the Muslims in the UK come from Pakistan, and a large majority, the rest, come from Bangladesh and from India. It's not the same in France. A lot of Muslims in France come from here, from North Africa. Have a look at this map. So this is a map of countries that used to be part of the British Empire. So at one time or another, Britain, as a power, was in charge of these different places. Some of these you might know, like Australia, Canada, they still have the Queen as their head of state. Some of these you might not have realised used to be under British control, like Cyprus, or a lot of these countries in Africa, like Nigeria. But there are 3 countries here: Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India. Those used to be British colonies. They used to be part of the British Empire. In fact, Pakistan and Bangladesh only became separate countries after they had been part of the British Empire. So the fact that most Muslims in the UK come from Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India means most Muslim communities in the UK trace their roots back to the British Empire. Okay, and that's going to be really important when you study history in Key Stage 3, and maybe even a bit later on in primary school. You might look at the British Empire, you might look at the influence. But that is something you could say about the roots of Muslim communities in the UK. You could say Muslim communities in the UK mostly find their roots in the former British Empire. Okay. Excellent. Let's have a look at the next slide, because this is the writing activity we're going to do for this lesson. What could you say about the roots of Muslim communities in Britain? Well, we've looked at statistics, we've looked at information and data, but now in your booklet you are going to answer a question, and you're going to have space to do a short paragraph. Describe the roots of Muslim communities in Britain. Don't know why there's a question mark there, but there we go. You could say the biggest proportion of Muslim communities in Britain have their roots in, and then you would need to look back at your pie chart in your booklet. You could say most Muslim communities have their roots in countries that used to be, and that's exactly what we were just talking about. So you just need to remember what we were just talking about. Muslim communities in Britain have their roots in lots of different countries, or not very many countries. You would have to make a decision about that, based perhaps on that pie chart. About half of British Muslims, or half of Muslims in Britain, were born ... So I've given you some sentence starters, and I'd be really interested to see what you come up with. So have fun writing a little paragraph there about what we've learned today, and I will speak to you next week. Have a great week. See you later.